history is not exactly the same in Honduras and Guatemala. We'll show you how a lot of these themes are very similar across Central America. Finally, Judy, Anson, head of Cross-Border Network, will connect the dots for everything for you by the end. So by the end, it will be clear the connection to the current asylum crisis, why people are fleeing, how it affects people, our personal responsibility as the United States. But we'll go into the end then to the donation ask about the Bienvenido Fund. The fund will be used to help asylum seekers, not a particular organization. Syra will do that presentation, and then we'll come back at the end to give you some more action steps before we leave for the day, before the question and answer. If you can go to the next slide there. So, setting the global perspective, first of all, this infographic here, this comes from the United Nations, and the United Nations updates these statistics every summer. You can see the list on the left, top hosting countries. You have Turkey, Colombia, Pakistan, Uganda, Germany. These are the countries that have done the most in terms of taking in refugees or asylum seekers in the recent years. In that sense, they are taking leadership globally in that sense. The United States is not on that list. Why are we not on that list? Because there would have been a time not long ago where we would have been on a list like this. We used to be a lot more helpful in addressing migration crises and taking in refugees and asylum seekers. We had policies that were much more welcoming. Why are we failing? And why is this such a big deal? If you can go to the next slide, we have one more. This is also from the United Nations. This number here, 70.5 million, this is their most recent update of the number. They've been updating this every summer. So last summer, it was lower, but it was really high. The summer before that, that was even higher than the summer before that. Every summer has kept getting worse, and yet we're already in a large migration crisis. How large is it? After World War II, which was a huge war across the whole world, that crisis, the migration crisis after that, there was about 25 million displaced persons after that. That was huge. But today's migration crisis globally is more than twice that size after World War II. We have 80 million people displaced. This is a really serious crisis. The world has really been failing to comprehensively address it if the numbers keep rising every year. So we have to take more responsibility in this. Now, talking about a large global migration crisis is overwhelming. It's overwhelming to think we're in the largest global migration crisis recorded in world history, but when you start breaking it down, it becomes more manageable. Every crisis is possible to make it more manageable when you break it down. So when we look at the numbers, so 55.7 million people are internally displaced. So that means they're displaced by conflict, but they're displaced within the borders of their own country. They just had to flee their local home within their country. So when we look at, that's still really bad. That still means it's a lot of in the world, there's a lot of instability. So that's not good. But in terms of just looking at the responsibility of other countries around the world to take in people who have to flee, the actual number that we'd have to address is a little less, is less than that 80 million. And then we get more specific when we look at asylum seekers. So our focus of today's presentation is on asylum seekers, especially from Central America. 4.2 million asylum seekers, that's globally. Locally, what we're looking at from Central America is not anywhere close to that. It's not even 100,000, it's way less. So when you start breaking down and making it manageable, we start to see, okay, there's real solutions, there's real things we can do. These don't have to be overwhelming crises. And unfortunately, what we're going to see in the presentation today is a large part of the reason for the asylum crisis in the US is because of the policy decisions we made. So these are things, it's a crisis that does not have to exist at the level that it is right now. It could be, with better policy, easily made more manageable. So when people think of the migrant caravans that came in the past few years, so 2019, late 2019, that was the big surge of news and pictures of these huge caravans, and you saw this huge amount of people coming, also leading in the early 2020. Well, that sounds overwhelming. That looks overwhelming when you see so many people, but the reality is the highest estimate you would find about how many people were actually coming, the highest estimate was maybe 60,000 people at the highest. And that's not a very big number. So the United States population, if you compare them, 60,000 people is less than 0.05% of our population in the United States. It's less than half of 1% of our population. And the reality is that unfortunately all those asylum seekers, because of our bad asylum policies, most of those people will not win asylum even if they have a legitimate case. It's hard for them to get a real shot at proper representation. But for example, let's say all those asylum seekers did get asylum. So all 60,000 people were accepted and they all came here and they were here and it was fine. That number, you wouldn't notice they had come. If it were not for the media attention, you wouldn't even notice they had come because it's such a small part of our population. So for us to be able to reach out and help more people, it's definitely easily possible, easily doable. We have the means to do it. So that's going to lead us now to see why are our current policies so hard to navigate, and that's what Claire is going to focus on next here.
Thanks for that intro, Trinidad. Again, I'm Claire Murphy-Shaw. I'm with the Asylum Clinic Kansas City, which is a nonprofit organization under the umbrella of the McCrummen Immigration Law Group here in Kansas City, and I focus my practice on humanitarian relief for immigrants, including those who are in removal proceedings, and most especially children in removal proceedings. This evening, I'm going to give you an overview of asylum law just to get some basics to help everyone understand just how complicated and how difficult this system is to navigate, especially for people coming to the United States, maybe with language barriers or other barriers to understanding the next steps that they would need to take to seek asylum in the United States. The challenges they face in court, which are immense at the moment, the changes that we were seeing at the border over the past 3 years. I could do probably a 10-hour presentation about that topic, but I'm going to just give you a snapshot to give you an idea of the most devastating and drastic changes that have happened over the last couple of years. And then the proposed new regulations that we expect to move forward, which will completely eviscerate the asylum system as we know it here in the United States. So I wanted to start by giving you just the basis of the protection that exists within US law. There's a lot of rhetoric in the media that says it's illegal, these people are illegals, they're coming here illegally. But we know that seeking asylum is not illegal. It is protected within our law. So under US law, a refugee is a person who is unable or unwilling to return to his or her home country because of a well-founded fear of persecution due to race, membership in a particular social group, political opinion, religion, or national origin. That's a very large definition, and I'll break it down for you a little bit. But under US law, we protect refugees. This definition is based on the United States 1951 Convention and the 1967 protocols relating to the status of refugees, which the United States is a party to, starting in 1968. Following the Vietnam War and the US experience resettling Indochinese refugees, Congress passed the Refugee Act of 1980, which incorporated the convention's definition into US law and provides the legal basis for today's US refugee admissions program. Next slide, please. So, in order to establish a valid claim for asylum, a refugee, when they come to the United States, they have to meet the elements that I read you that long definition. If you break it out into its elements, those are the elements that somebody has to present in order to establish a valid claim for asylum. So I'll just run through the elements here for you again. They must present evidence of past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution. It must be on account of a protected ground. It must be committed by the government, or the government is unwilling or unable to control the persecutor. There must be no option for internal relocation. The person must not be subject to any bars, and the person must merit a favorable exercise and discretion. That's the overview of what it takes to prove that a person deserves asylum protection within the United States. slide, please. So just to break that out a little bit farther for you, the protected grounds that I mentioned, they can be based on a person's race and nationality, religion, political opinion, or a particular social group. I apologize. I've got children banging at the door. So those are the protected grounds, and all of those grounds can be imputed. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea of what a particular social group might be, that might be former gang members, immediate family members, witnesses, somebody who's assisted law enforcement, LGBTQ, female genital cutting, child abuse, children viewed as property, and gender-based. So there's a lot of people who may fall within a protected ground, but we have to be able to establish under the law that they meet all of those elements that I discussed. Next slide, please. So the general process to apply for asylum, it's difficult, it's complicated, it's very unwieldy to navigate for asylum seekers. The first issue is that they must be in the United States in order to claim asylum. That's one of the differences between asylum seekers and refugees. Refugees are typically people who are seeking to come into the United States and they're granted a legal status or protection while they're waiting in maybe a third country like Tanzania. If they may be Congolese refugees waiting in a refugee camp, they're granted status and they come to the United States. Someone seeking asylum has not been able to obtain any kind of legal status from outside the United States. And so they cross the border. They might cross without inspection or present at a port of entry. Then most likely they will be detained by CBP, and at that point they need to pass a credible fear interview, which is a threshold interview where they need to establish that they meet at least those basic elements, that they're going to be able to it's like a gate where they pass through, and if they can meet that threshold, they will be released into the interior and allowed to pursue asylum. There's a 1-year filing deadline. So if a person crosses, they have 1 year from that date of entry in order to seek asylum. If they don't, they're not going to be eligible. And that's a really difficult thing for a lot of people. It sounds like a long time, 1 year, but a year goes by really, really quickly for people who are just trying to live day to day, feed themselves and their children. They may not have, they don't have work authorization. They have a lot of barriers that they are confronting daily. So that 1 year is very, very difficult sometimes to achieve for some people. And then just in court, the way the court system works, people will have 2 different master calendar hearings, and then they just get 1 trial. And that trial is their 1 chance to present their evidence, to present their witnesses, their testimony, in order to establish that they meet the elements of asylum. And then if they lose at court, they can appeal that decision. So that's a really quick overview of just the general process of what it takes to apply for asylum. Next slide, please. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about the challenges that every single asylum seeker is going to confront in immigration court. First off, there's no appointed counsel in immigration court. This isn't something that I think a lot of people understand, because we see court on TV and people get public defenders and they think, oh, everybody in court automatically gets counsel, they get defense. But that's not true in immigration court. And unfortunately, there's also not a lot of attorneys that are taking these cases. They're difficult cases, they're long, they last for years, they're usually very expensive. So asylum seekers will have to either hire someone, or if they're very lucky, they'll find a pro bono attorney. But there's not nearly enough resources to go around in terms of meeting the need. asylum seekers have language and other barriers that make it difficult for them to access the system. Everything's got to be in English, obviously. There's financial barriers, there's cultural barriers, just in terms of the amount of paperwork and what it takes to navigate the system. The first hearing might be after the 1-year filing deadline. And that's a weird concept, to think that a large portion of your case is before you even go to court for the very first time. But that happens frequently in asylum cases, where people think, I don't need to do anything for my case because my first court date isn't coming up until 2021. And so I can wait until then to get an attorney. And by then they may have missed their opportunity to apply for asylum. So it's really, really difficult to make sure everybody is aware when they enter and they're seeking asylum that they have 1 year to do so, or their due process may be lost. Seeking asylum is procedurally complicated and long, so I won't get into all of the technicalities here, but the filing process is difficult. You have to file in court, and you also have to serve ICE. You have biometrics, which is fingerprints. You've got to fee in your application with USCIS to get that fingerprints process started. If you move, you have to make sure you update the court. You have to update ICE. It's difficult for people, especially if they're unrepresented, to meet all of those guideposts along the way of seeking asylum. And then the Attorney General has referred many decisions to himself, which make seeking asylum all that much harder. It raises the standards that people need to meet. It makes the protections that do exist under the law weaker. It rules out a lot of areas in those particular social groups that I mentioned that otherwise would have been protected. So some of the most devastating that we've seen is matter of AB, which removed protection for women seeking to escape domestic violence. Just all of these times that the Attorney General takes a case, raises the standard, it just makes it that much harder for people to qualify for asylum in the immigration courts. And then hostile judges or hostile ICE counsel, that's a challenge for every person in immigration court. And the judges now have performance quotas that have been put into place, where they have to complete 700 cases a year and have less than a 15% remand rate. So the judges are under the gun to complete cases, and so they want to just push things through, and it doesn't always translate to doing what's best for each individual client or case. So it's a frustrating change that's been a recent development. And that's just a couple of the challenges that we see. There's many, many more that I don't have time to get into today. Next slide, please. So again, likewise, these are the changes at the U.S. border with Mexico. Along our southern border, we've seen the Trump administration. I mean, it's been basically a battlefield at the border, and Trump has declared many times he wants to build a wall, and we think of that as a physical wall, but at the same time, the administration has been building an invisible wall using policy and law. And so I'm going to run through a couple of the most devastating changes and the most difficult for people to navigate. But the first was in 2018, is what we call metering. What happens is, I said earlier in the presentation, in the past, to seek asylum, you could come through a port of entry, or people also came however they could come. If they're fleeing for their lives, they might cross the river, they might come ashore. There's different ways that people arrive in the United States. People also come legally with a visa. But in 2018, the administration instituted a policy of metering, where it's trying to force people and to squeeze them to come only through the ports of entry. And then when they try to, they are put on a long list where they have to wait. And so it's created a huge backlog of people. 21,000 people were waiting to cross by November of 2019, because they were sitting in these lines waiting to present at a port of entry and claim fear and proceed into the United States to seek asylum. The Remain in Mexico program and the port courts, that was what came in 2019. And basically that was the United States saying, okay, you want to seek asylum here, fine, but you're going to have to wait in Mexico while your legal case proceeds. You don't get to proceed into the United States and pursue asylum from the United States. And the port courts are essentially almost like kangaroo courts. They're tents that exist at the border, where it's very, very difficult to find counsel. It's very difficult to know when your hearing is. There's all kinds of challenges to people who are in that port court system. And then the asylum ban. I'm sure many of you heard about the different bans barring people, but the most recent one was the Asylum Ban 2.0, which barred people who transited through third countries or who entered between ports of entry. And the logic of the administration is that if you could transit through a third country, you should have stopped in that country to seek asylum. Why wouldn't you claim asylum in Guatemala or Honduras or somewhere else along the way to the United States? But we all know there's actually absolutely no realistic way to claim asylum in those countries. Most people are fleeing those countries to come to the United States. So the asylum ban is, I think currently the courts have shot it down. It's been revived in different ways, but it's still out there. And I'll talk about the new iteration when I tell you about the new asylum regulations that have been proposed. But first, as of March 2020, the border is closed to all asylum seekers under Title 42, which is a health-related code. So the wall is fully in place. People are not coming through. Asylum seekers are being expelled back into Mexico or just immediately removed to their home countries. And this includes unaccompanied children who are not being processed into the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And really quickly, I won't get too deep into that issue, but that issue is near and dear to my heart. And it's devastating for me to think about children coming alone without a parent or legal guardian to our border seeking protection, only to be taken into custody, held at basically a black site. They're being moved into hotel rooms where they're held incommunicado and then returned to their home country, never given access to an attorney, never given their due process rights, never placed into the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is the agency that's been given jurisdiction over unaccompanied minors. Because in theory, we recognize that they're children. They're extremely vulnerable to trafficking and other dangerous things that could happen at the border. So this change is absolutely devastating and heartbreaking. And I hope that the border warriors and ACLU are going to be successful in their current lawsuits to prevent this practice from continuing, and that children will again be able to seek protection in the United States. But right now they're not. The whole entire system that's been put in place to protect children is empty. All of the ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement shelters, are basically empty at this point. So we've got a whole system in place to protect people that we're not utilizing. So the June 2020 new asylum regs, I'm sorry this is such a downer, but let's move on to another dreadful development on the next slide. So the proposed regs that were announced June 15th, to me it's just the death knell to what was left of our asylum system. It's going to eviscerate any protections that did exist under the law. It will extend the transit ban to all asylum seekers, not those just seeking asylum at or after crossing the southern border. It's going to rewrite the definition of firm resettlement, and that's a concept in asylum law where if somebody was living in a country outside the United States on their way to the US and was offered legal protection, they can't like forum shop. They can't say, oh, I don't really like it here in this country, I want to go to the United States. No, they've been firmly resettled. They need to stay where they are. But what this does is rewrites that definition to include people who may have lived somewhere but were never granted any legal status while they were in that country. It allows the denial of asylum for discretionary factors, such as entering the United States between ports of entry or transiting through a third country. It allows immigration judges to just summarily deny applications prior to a hearing. It redefines a particular social group, which is going to impact women and LGBTQ and anybody who's claiming asylum outside of just the religion, race, national origin, and political opinion grounds. And it's going to essentially end asylum for those fleeing violence from those who don't fit the definition of a state actor. So that's one of those elements that we talked about in the very beginning, where the persecutor has to be a state actor or someone the government can't or won't control. So a classic example would be gangs in Central America. They are the de facto government in many places. And so this new reg would say, because they're not the official government, if someone's fleeing persecution from gangs in Central America, that doesn't qualify them for asylum because it's not a state actor. It changes the very definition of persecution itself, and it raises the legal standard for that threshold interview that I talked to you about, called the credible fear interview. So essentially, it's going to just devastate any chance of seeking asylum here in the United States. And next slide, please. At the same time that was announced, we also learned about work permit changes. And this one I highlight mostly because of just the cruelty that it takes to make this change in the law, because it doesn't hurt anybody to give work authorization to people while their cases are pending at the immigration court or at the Office of Citizenship. It allows them to feed themselves, feed their children while they're waiting to see whether they're going to be granted asylum or not. And so in the past, we had special protections for asylum seekers to get that work permit more quickly. That's going to be removed at the end of August, August 21st. It's extended the waiting period that people have to wait to apply for that work authorization card or that EAD. Instead of 150 days before they could apply, it's now 365 days. And that's a really, really long time to wait to be able to be eligible to work legally while you're here in the United States. They're going to deny work authorization for what they're calling applicant caused delays. It's not 100% clear how this is going to be applied yet, but it could be devastating for people who just might move across the country and change their asylum office. That could be interpreted as a delay in their case, and that could prevent them from being eligible to work. If they crossed between those ports of entry, that's called an illegal entry, and they would be barred from work authorization. So that's a large number of people who I represent may have entered irregularly or crossed the border and are here seeking asylum, and they won't be eligible to get that EAD. And then there's a 2-year cap. So they can get that card if they are able to meet all of these things I talked about, but only for 2 years. So this one just breaks my heart. I think this is one of the cruelest things that we could do is deprive people that chance to feed themselves and their families and work while they're here in the United States. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, this was a quote I found on the Human Rights Watch website, that the United States was once a leader in protecting refugees, but now it leads the world in devising illegal and inhumane policies to ban, block, and punish refugees from seeking asylum. I think this is just an absolute betrayal of our values as Americans. I think we've been a country that welcomes people, that values the diversity they bring, that values the melting pot, so to speak. And under this administration, we've completely turned our back. So I know that all of you here today are here because you want to learn about this issue and you don't want to be a part of this cruel and inhumane system and change. So I appreciate you being here learning about this issue, and I hope you'll take action tonight after listening to the rest of the presentation. Thank you. I'm going to pass it now to Christina and Corliss of the Cross Border Network.
All right. Thank you so much, Claire Murphy-Shaw, for giving us that wonderful insight. Well, not so wonderful, but still knowledgeable insight that we need to know. Good evening, guys. My name is Christine Disming, and I'm with the Cross Border Network, and I'm a board member on there, which is located in Kansas City. I participated in the 2019 Human Rights Delegation to Honduras to seek an answer to the question, why do they flee? For this portion of our discussion on asylum, Corliss Jacobs and myself will be shedding light on the recent caravans coming from Honduras and exploring why Hondurans are choosing to leave their home to seek asylum here in the United States. So our delegation last year, we learned a lot of things, but most of the stories fell into 5 different categories on why people left. The first one is political corruption, lack of health care, defunding of education, extortion by gangs, and land and resource grabs by private corporations. Oh, I think another slide by. There we go. Oh, there we go. So the very first one I'll speak on is political corruption. Many Hondurans seek asylum due to political reasons, and the chaos stems from a very specific date, June 28th, 2009, when democratically elected President Manuel Zelaya was deposed in a right-wing coup after he had the audacity to create land reforms that benefited poor campesinos or farmers and hurt the richest oligarchs in Honduras who were involved in a global palm oil production. After his removal was blessed by the Obama administration, Zelaya would be replaced by would-be dictators Porfirio Pepe Lobo and Juan Orlando Hernandez. Both of these men would go on to create the turbulent scene that we see today in Honduras, but Pepe Lobo actually fired majority of the judges on the Supreme Court because they rejected his model cities law, which surrendered chunks of Honduran territory to foreign corporations to exploit and rule. Later, Lobo's successor, Juan Orlando Hernandez, got the newly compliant judges to overrule the Constitution, which prohibited him from running a second term. They agreed that the Constitution was unconstitutional. In Honduras, presidents can only serve a 1 4-year sentence. However, this was completely thrown out the window when Hernandez became president back in 2013. And I find it kind of interesting when I talk about this with people that sometimes they say, hey, why don't people just stay in their country and try and make change there? Well, it's not that simple. It's a lot more complicated. The current president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, turned dictator, has made it clear that those who do not support his neoliberal regime are bound to end up disappearing, tortured, imprisoned on trumped-up charges, or killed. And when I'm talking about neoliberalism here, I'm talking about the set of policies that have dominated many countries in the last 40 years of our history. Neoliberalism asserts that free markets, unregulated everywhere, government services, privatized creates the best possible economy for all. However, the policies of neoliberalism have created the greatest inequality of wealth in the US and Honduran history and among other countries that we have seen recently. But people are still trying to make change in Honduras. Don't get me wrong, there are people who are going out there in the streets and protesting against Hernandez, but it's been increasingly difficult when the government, with the US urging and aid, has increased militarization in order to suppress their own people, effectively silencing those who do stand up. As seen in 2017, when angry Hondurans took to the streets, angered by the election results that they see as a complete sham. They took to the streets, and the Hernandez regime declared martial law, put the military on the streets, firing live ammunition, killing and arresting people who dare stand up to them. And I know here in the United States, Americans would not put up with such action from our government. I don't know why Hondurans should. So the very first reason why people leave is political corruption. The next one is healthcare. Another reason why Hondurans leave is due to the gutting of the healthcare system. Back in 2013, in his very first election, Hernandez stole money from Social Security healthcare systems to fund his own re-election campaign, effectively bankrupting the healthcare system. Many hospitals, even with good doctors, are left without adequate supplies. Fake NGOs and companies are created that siphon money from the government while selling non-existent medical supplies to hospitals. And when hospitals are saying, hey, where are those supplies? Basically, the government points at the doctors or nurses saying, I don't know, maybe they stole them. They blame the people who are giving those care to why the medicine, these non-existent supplies never showed up. Inadequate care leads to many Hondurans dying. unless they're rich and can go to a private hospital. And what's astounding is today during COVID-19 in Honduras, to check into a private hospital, you have to deposit 20,000 USD first before you're admitted. So that's to a private hospital to get adequate care. The next thing is education. Education is something that everyone sees, that uses to move up in life, to gain more knowledge, to rise up to from where they are to be something better. But education only accounts for 5% of the budget in Honduras, the total budget. However, since Hernandez has taken power, he has reduced that budget every single year, leading to schools to go half day, and basically supplies, desks, security has lessened. In some cases, students have to supply their own desks if they want a place to sit or to write at. And the aid that sometimes comes from the United States, they rarely see it. When we went into San Pedro Sula, we asked about this aid that was coming. So they're asking about this aid that was coming in, and they would not be receiving it. And when we talked to parents, parents were saying that because of lack of education, they fear for their child's lives in these violence-ridden neighborhoods, and they fear that their children may be targeted or harassed by these gangs that run these neighborhoods. And they take that chance, like I think any parent would take that chance to go to El Norte, to come to the United States to find better educational opportunities and to get further away from the violence that takes the lives of so many people throughout Honduras. And the very last one that I'm going to be touching upon is extortion and war tax. Sorry, there we go. A very last one I'm going to touch upon is why people leave before Corliss takes over is extortion and war tax. And extortion is a way that gangs and other corrupt organizations, this is how they make their money. They collect payments from families and businesses that are being successful, sometimes on a weekly basis, sometimes on a monthly basis. Sometimes they have to pay up to, there's been cases that when we talk to families and other people when we were in Honduras, that people had to pay 3 different gangs during a weekly or monthly basis. And if they did not pay this war tax, or if they refused to do so, or if they just couldn't because they were so poor, families faced harassment, torture, death. Violence through extortion, by the way, is not an isolated event in Honduras. It's throughout in their small rural towns, all the way up into the capital of Tegucigalpa. And Honduras does have a national anti-extortion force. However, it fails to go after those who benefit from extortion. Instead, it goes after those who were threatened or bribed to collect the money, the small man in this whole bigger picture. So essentially, therefore, it's been ineffective for the past few years where it's been put in place. And I'd like to tell you guys, before I hand this over to Corliss, that 67% of Hondurans live in poverty. When they're paying these taxes, when they're facing these type of things, they don't have the opportunities that we have here to rise out of poverty. Families are unable to save money. When extortion gets bad, when the violence gets bad, when education systems go wrong, whenever it becomes underfunded or healthcare is completely drained, they have no place to hide in Honduras. Instead, they choose to gather all their belongings and they flee to the United States. Our very last reason that we're going to be talking about, well, Corliss is going to talk about, is why is about land grabs, which is a huge, huge issue happening in Honduras. So Corliss, I'm going to turn it over to you and tell us a little bit more about the land grabs happening in Honduras.
Hi, I'm Corliss. I did turn on my video. Can you hear me? Okay. The land and resource grabs versus indigenous rights, it is a huge problem, and it is the epitome of corruption in Honduras. Our delegation visited Garifuna communities in Trujillo. The Garifunas are Afro-Indigenous who have lived on the northern coast of Honduras since the late 1700s. That coastal land is incredibly beautiful, as you can see in this slide, but unfortunately, because of its beauty, it is ripe for development with resorts and retirement communities for rich Hondurans, foreign tourists, and retirees. We met Kamemu, a young Garifuna man who immigrated to the United States as a child with his parents and grew up here. And he was deported a few years ago. He returned home, and he found that in place of his Garifuna village and fishing area, there was now a Canadian developer selling residences in the undiscovered Enjoy Trujillo Beach, quote, quote. There is a slide that shows the entry of Trujillo Beach. This is where North Americans could own a slice of Caribbean paradise, he says. So, Kamemu, it understood quickly that Enjoy was selling stolen land to unsuspecting foreigners wanting to move into their dream homes. How was he able to realize almost immediately that this land had been stolen? Well, he knew what all Garifuna know, that they own their land with traditional collective titles. No individual member of the group has the right to sell the land on which they live, a condition that most Garifuna people favor because it makes their community stronger. Nonetheless, even though these titles are well documented, fraudulent land sales, quote, quote, government expropriation for private projects, including a port facility close to where we were, and encroachment of narco-traffickers make life for the Garifuna a daily and dangerous struggle. These phony sales and resort projects are occurring all along the northern coast with the approval or complicity of the government. Almost every tourist development is from the US or Canada. The target market is North Americans. The profits go to owners in those countries, not to the Garifuna people on whose land they sit. These phony sales and resort projects are putting the Garifuna people in danger. So Kamemu joined with his people to defend and resist because he knew that no one would rescue them. We also talked with Neo, another Garifuna man deported from the US who had built a house on land across the road from Enjoy to stop them from putting a pipeline in to steal the Garifuna's water. Because Enjoy had bribed the local mayor, he offers absolutely no help in fighting for Garifuna indigenous water rights. And of course, neither will the national government. Instead, thugs regularly drive by Neo's house and point guns at him and his kids. Land and resource grabs from Garifa communities and the dangers that follow have pushed well over 100,000 to migrate to the United States. The combination of owning beachfront property and enduring racism create a double whammy for the Garifunas. Sadly, when they migrate to the US, they face racism here also. However, the only choice Camemu and Neo have as deportees is to stay in Honduras and fight back, which is dangerous work. Recently, they and other defenders have been joined by many protesters carrying signs that say, Garifuna lives also are important. In other words, Black Lives Matter. That is something that we need to recognize here at this moment, just after Jacob Blake in Wisconsin was shot in the back many times in front of his children, something that happens in Honduras all too often. So there are many Garifuna towns and villages on the northern coast, all resisting threats and pressure to give up their land and leave. About 5 weeks ago, 4 young men activists were abducted from their homes by armed men wearing police uniforms. They haven't been heard from or seen since, in spite of pleas and protests. Because the Honduran government has been unresponsive, the families and community have reached out internationally to help in pressuring and shaming their own government to act. This is unfortunately not the first time that land rights defenders have been disappeared or murdered. It has happened all too often. Another indigenous community we visited a bit later was Rayatoga, a remote and poor but charming town in the southern mountains of Honduras. We arrived just as the Lenca people who lived there were gathering for a town meeting. The Lenca hold title to large areas of surrounding land and are subject to a different kind of land grab. It happens when the government unilaterally gives a concession to a private, often foreign, investor to build a hydroelectric dam or a port, as we saw on the North Coast, or mining or palm oil plantations that are being enlarged in other areas owned by very wealthy Hondurans and corporations. The government, in giving these concessions of indigenous or campesino land, never ask, of course, and neither do the landowners benefit from the projects. Then, after the deal is made, the corporations and the developers come in and clear away the people like some kind of weed. This is a violation of the International Labor Organization Convention 169, which guarantees the rights of indigenous and tribal populations. However, the current government of Honduras has no respect for international law, and of course, as Christine talked about, no respect for Honduran law as well. So near Rayatoga, a corporation that received a concession from the government started corruption on a huge hydroelectric dam, which cut off the Lenca's access to water. However, in Rayatoga, unlike many other communities, the people stood up. They blocked roads. They protested. They eventually burned a dam. Some were killed, many were injured, but the dam project is on hold for now. Their resistance is truly inspiring, but poverty and threats from the authorities lead many to leave Rayatoga as well. And they all know that if they stay, they will have to continue resisting. In both of these cases, Honduras is open for business, quote, from former Pepe Lobo president. It means the corruption and no rule of law for the powerful. It means public officials actually join with corporations and wealthy cronies to expropriate land and extract resources without the consent or benefit of the people. Corruption in the name of free market economic development drives people from the land and turned them into migrants, further hollowing out and weakening the community's ability to fight and survive. We'll pause here just a moment so you have time to read this extensive slide. Okay, our next speaker is Asylum Tot, and she is going to talk about a bit of history of Guatemala and her parents who migrated from that country during times of great violence and disruption that the U.S. had quite a part in. So, Asylum, it's all yours.
Thank you, Corliss. So hi everybody, my name is Asylum Tot. As they have mentioned, my parents are from Guatemala and I myself am from Guatemala, Mazatenango to be specific. And today I'm here to talk to you about our immigration story, my family's immigration story, how it all began for us. So to tell you a little bit about my father was a pastor, missionary worker, and an entrepreneur. And in the 1980s and 1990s, Guatemala was not safe at all. A lot of things were happening where it forced them to migrate. And mainly they migrated to Costa Rica and around Central America to follow their passion. And eventually they came back to Guatemala, but still the economy and the society was not healed. Why do I say that there was tough times and why there was no healing? I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of Guatemala. So Guatemala was in the Civil War from 1960s to 1990s around. It lasted about 36 years. And because of that, there was a big emigration from there, which technically means that people moved abroad, leaving the country permanently because of everything that was going on. Essentially what happened in Guatemala is that the military took over for about 5 years. And a regiment was there that persecuted a lot of different communities. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll show you guys a timeline of what happened. So as I mentioned, it started around the 1960s, but to be honest with you all, it started around 1954 when there was, the CIA was conspiring to overthrow Jacobo Arbenz because he was threatening to expropriate the lands of the United Fruit Company. Because of that, influences began to come into Guatemala that gave them a lot of different tools and resources that began the Civil War that lasted for 36 years. So real quick, this is a timeline that's extensive and you guys can read it. I'm not gonna go super detailed on it, but I'll mention the main highlights. In 1966, the civilian rule came back into place with the new leadership. However, in 1970, the military took over again and immediately took back Guatemala into a state of siege, putting the military more in control over civilians. In 1981, Guatemala was actually reported by the Inter-American Human Rights Commission on the atrocities that was happening, on all the violation of human rights that they were acting on. In 1982, and this is a key year for Guatemala, General Efraín Ríos Montt seized power and took seat in presidency. He actually annulled the 1965 Constitution in Guatemala, dissolved Congress, and suspended political parties. This in return created the most awful years in Guatemala because the military was in full control. This was what created a huge genocide within the Mayan and indigenous communities, which created a lot of the unsafe environment just because there was so much injustice being done. And honestly, the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones who were causing you the most pain. So going forward in 1985, we were able to build a new constitution and a new leader came into place. However, you know, things were still not the best and there was a lot of cleanup to do. So the years were still rough as they were going forward. a lot of things came to light. A lot of people started reporting. A lot of investigations started coming in. And in 1992, the CIA finally admitted and confirmed that they specifically were helping the military in Guatemala to target the Indigenous and Mayans group in Guate. In 1993, President Jorge Serrano came in and once more tried to dissolve the Congress, but he was quickly forced to resign. And then in 1993, we got no leader. In 1994, we got no leadership, and the peace talks began. In 1996, we were able to finally finalize the peace treaty talks. However, things did not stop there. That impact is still very huge in Guatemala. That General Efraín Ríos Montt continued to come into light. His family, his name, the power that they hold behind, still very frightening in Guatemala. He actually was announced and confirmed that he was guilty of all of this. However, the government in Guatemala overthrew the sentence of the court, so he did not truly serve his time. And this was in 2011, and in 2018, he passed away, still going through courts, trying to figure out what the final result was going to be. So there is still very recent where Guatemala is still very much healing. So going forward, a lot of atrocities happen, especially genocide with the Mayan and Indigenous communities. The most interesting fact was that the U.S. helped train the military and help fund the military to commit all of this in Guatemala, just because they were under the impression that they were supportive of leftist ideals, and that's why they decided to, influence. The ripple effects was that it took a long time, and it still is taking a long time to regain and establish peace. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of pain, there's still a lot of rectifications that need to happen. It's a long path to healing. And just to finalize, because of everything that was going on and because of the unsafe environment that my parents were facing, because there's so much more that I can tell you about this during this time. However, just to really finalize it, my parents went through a lot of extortion. My parents went through a lot of different accusations. My dad was taken into a secret prison. They tried to get money out of him. I had mentioned that he was an entrepreneur, so even his own friends that were close to him started extorting him. And as he was doing his travels back and forth from the US, he had an opportunity to stay and he took it. And this is how I am here today, telling you our stories and fighting the good fight on figuring out how to help others. So to continue on in this awesome conversations that highlight all of these different things that happen very close to us, our next speaker is Judy Anson, the president of the Cross Border Network, who is going to tie all of this together.
Thank you, Jocelyn. It's just amazing to hear these stories, because I think most Americans just aren't aware at all of what people have to go through and why they leave. My organization, the Cross Border Network, always says that our mission is to connect the dots. Connect the dots between globalization and migration from the viewpoint of the people who do the work. So now that we've heard about why people are leaving Honduras and Guatemala and what our asylum policies are, my job is to connect the dots. We're going to ask you to send a letter to your senators and Congress members asking them to speak out about the attack on asylum. Claire wrote it, and in part it says, the group most under attack by the Trump administration is asylum seekers, who are the most vulnerable and marginalized of all immigrant and refugee groups. They come to our border without status, and usually with nothing more than the clothes on their back, to ask the United States government to protect them from persecution. Many will be tortured or killed if forced to return to their home countries. Yet the United States Customs and Border Patrol is expelling them at the border under the guise of protecting the health of U.S. citizens. We must not betray our international commitments to accept and protect asylum seekers. We must respect the right to seek asylum and provide asylum seekers with the due process they seek in our immigration courts. This especially applies to the unaccompanied minors coming to the border alone and afraid," unquote. We'll give you a link to send this letter later to your member of Congress and your senator, because we think it's really important that they speak out. The fact is that even if Trump lets them in, the vast majority of people who are fleeing Central America won't qualify for our strict and biased asylum system. They'll be deported, or they won't even try to win asylum because their chances of winning are so small and lawyers are so expensive. They'll be relegated to the undocumented if they're lucky enough to avoid the increasingly brutal grasp of the Border Patrol and ICE. Trump and company portray pretty much all immigrants as criminals. But most immigration law violations are civil, they're not criminal. These so-called criminals, though, are the same people who are cleaning your houses, fixing your roofs, processing your meat and chicken, washing dishes in the restaurants you go to, and picking your food in the fields. They are a large part of the essential workforce of this pandemic, and by and large, U.S. employers want them available and deportable because that keeps them cheap and unlikely to organize. Having easily deportable workforce has been an essential part of agricultural economics for at least 100 years. Can you please mute yourself? Having an easily deportable workforce has been an essential part of agricultural economics for at least 100 years. And since Reagan, of many other industries, from construction to meatpacking to hotels, and now it extends to the ever-growing police forces of the Department of Homeland Security. All of them survive by having easily deportable immigrants. The Black Lives Matter movement is teaching us how slavery contributed to the accumulation of great capital, which built the industrial corporations and infrastructure of the U.S. The robber barons of that era, whose capital was built on slave profits, then bought elected officials and judges who subsidized them, failed to tax them, and generally allowed them to undermine American democracy ever since. Likewise, our immigration policy also delivers super profits to the likes of Smithfield and Tyson, Core Civic and the Geo Group, Marriott and Hilton, Campbell's and Kraft, all of whom take advantage of cheap and deportable immigrants and then work to destroy democracy as they push their neoliberal agenda of no taxes, privatization, and deregulation. So you see, just as slaves weren't the only ones hurt by the slave system, today immigrants aren't the only ones hurt by maintaining a caste of undocumented, easily deportable workers. You've heard Christina and Corliss's and Diocelin's reports on why people are leaving Central America. And you might ask why we don't bring them in as refugees? Except for Cubans, people from Latin America don't get to be refugees. In this chart, you can see, can you change the slide, Molly? You can see that Latin Americans are in red. This goes from 1975 to 2019. And you see that people from every other part of the world are refugees, but not people from Latin America, unless, of course, you're Cuban. Juan Gonzalez wrote a book called Harvest of Empire about how the U.S. empire has produced our Latino immigrant populations. In chapter after chapter, Gonzalez shows the dislocation, impoverishment, violence perpetrated since the Monroe Doctrine of 1817 on the lands and islands to the south, which we occupied, sent gunboats to, bombed, sprayed with chemicals, pressured or toppled their governments. Some we repeatedly overthrew, like Nicaragua, Haiti, and Honduras. From others, we stole their territory, like Mexico, Cuba, Colombia/Panama. We exploited their resources, as in Brazil, Peru, Guatemala. We helped kill their indigenous populations, as in Mexico, Brazil, Guatemala, Honduras, etc., etc., etc. And as their villages and economies were disfigured by mining companies, or war, or peonage, or free trade agreements, people fled. First to the cities, where they joined the ranks of the precariat. From Mexico, after NAFTA, millions of corn farming peasants were displaced by global agribusiness like Cargill, as Mexico became a net importer of corn. Campesinos went north to the maquilas, which paid wages of hunger, and many continued on across the border into the United States. There's a sign that's common in immigrant protests, which says, "We are here because you are there. We are here because you were there." In other words, our Latino immigrants are the harvest of our empire. It's empire that dislocates so many because empire makes life impossible for its subjects. When globalization hit Central America and we signed CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement, in 2005, the process of development was already underway, pushed by the wars of the 1980s in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Guatemala, and later the so-called drug war and their refugees and the dictatorships, corruption, and militarization which followed. Next slide, please. We always present ourselves as the saviors, but indeed, that's not how our subjects see us, and I'll give you a second to read this cartoon about the war on drugs. I think it's a great cartoon. It should be apparent that simply fixing our broken immigration laws is not going to solve this problem. Our immigration system was bad before Trump. It was bad before George W. Bush. It was bad before Bill Clinton. Our immigration policies have always been racist. The Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1883, just to give you an example. But still, there's a lot we could do to make it better, starting with stopping the incarceration and criminalization of migrants. The rest of the solution has to do with what journalist David Bacon calls the right to stay home. The involuntary migration from Mexico and Central America is driven by US policy and surged with globalization and neoliberalism, primarily imposed by the US and multinational corporations and banks. The US now has 9 bases in Honduras, including Soto Cano Air Force Base. It's our beachhead, from which our imperial state controls the Caribbean and Central America and can even reach into South America. The government thinks it must hold on to Honduras, and to do so, it must support dictators who repress democracy. The US must ally us with the most reactionary, venal, and murderous oligarchs who literally are looting the resources, the labor, and even the ventilators and the PPE sent by foreign governments. Why? Because US empire must be maintained at all costs. And our only alternative then is to wall ourselves off from the inevitable tide of refugees. Whether it's a Republican like Trump or a Democrat like Obama, and probably Biden, they all wall us either physically or with policies that only let in a trickle, and they all keep looting and killing and creating more involuntary migrants. So, we are still there, and they keep coming here. If we want any real justice for migrants, if we want an end to xenophobia and the demagogues who push it, we have to stop creating migrants and stop exploiting them and their natural resources, stop corrupting their governments, stop the World Bank and the IMF from imposing our model of extractive neoliberal capitalism on them, and let them fix their own countries, free of our self-serving development theories, free of police and military trained by the School of the Americas, free of the CIA, the drug war, and all the excuses the US invents to maintain its hegemony. More than immigration reform, what we need is an end to US imperialism, and that's a big task for all of us. I'll end by quoting Berta Cáceres, the amazing assassinated Indigenous leader from Honduras. She was an internationalist, and she understood that the current system of savage capitalism is killing us all, and that we all need to get together to fight it in our common interest. She said, "We must shake our conscience free of the rapacious capitalism, racism, and patriarchy that will only assure our own self-destruction." Next, we have Zaira Gordillo, who's a longtime cross-border network member and an immigration attorney. She's going to talk about a fund for immigrants that we're setting up and hope that you donate to. Zaira?
Thank you, Judy. Good evening, everyone. As Judy mentioned, I have been part of Cross Border Network since college years and have continued my involvement. I am also an attorney in New York City. I'm a public defender for legal aid in New York City, and I'm a very unique type of public defender in that I work in immigration court. And so it's been a lot of hard work, but I can see firsthand why my particular project has been very important in supporting immigrants' rights. And so I believe that there are a lot of advocates out there that are pushing for similar public defender models in immigration court. As Claire, our presenter, noted, that there is not enough representation of immigrants. And so that is definitely one way that we are trying to, the direction that we want to go. I want to talk about the Bienvenido Fund. We're actually kickstarting this fund tonight, which is very exciting. I know we've been talking about very not so good things about asylum, but I think here's an opportunity for all of us to get really excited about very specific things that we can do to support local immigrant families in our community. And so there's I'm sorry, can you go back to the other slide? Yeah, so this is just a nice snapshot of what's to come, that immigration is very expensive. The asylum process is very expensive, and it is, now there will be a price increase effective October 2nd. So this is just so you have a sense of how much more it's going to be. There are a lot of immigrants that want to become citizens, and so now it's, I would say, almost doubling. And so what we wanted to do is to create this fund to support the filing fees of the immigrants. So if you can just go to the next slide. And this is just a list of the different forms that we've identified that we would like to help cover costs for, including expert witnesses that will be used in trials. So I have a client, a current client of mine who is from Bangladesh, and he was detained in New York City, was detained for several months. I can't even remember exactly how much. He was working a part-time job, breadwinner, he had a family of 5, and so he needed to come up with the money to renew his work permit, because that was really his only source of income. And so it was really nice to be able to go to him and say, this is from a different fund, to tell him, we can help you cover half of the cost. And so he was very grateful. He was able to continue his job because his employer was actually pressuring him to renew his permit. And so he had tons of anxiety. And when we were able to provide this extra source of income to cover the cost, he was very, very excited. So what I'm saying is that there are so many immigrants in the community that where money is an issue, and especially right now with the pandemic. And so this is an opportunity for all of us to pitch in, to contribute, and give what you can, because we do have certain privilege that others do not have. And so this is one very specific way you can help, especially right now, since we're very limited on ways on how we can volunteer and give back. Donating is a very good way to do that. So we have a link that we will be sharing to all of you. Please give generously, because these fees are very, very high, and we want to support as many families as possible. So yeah, please donate. Sorry, and now I am passing the torch to Trinidad, who will be sharing about different opportunities on how you can take action.
Okay, so I hope everyone can see the link that Molly just posted. That's the link to donate. Please donate now. So here's our slide of 3 things you can do to take action. I'm jumping to point number 3 to just repeat what Cyrus said and emphasize it, because we really need people to donate now. For those who don't know, most of our groups here were in the Kansas City area, and Syra has this cool perspective because she works with the New York area. And we also have partner groups in Oregon. And there's some areas in the country that have made a lot of progress working towards systems of what you would call universal legal rep, where everyone gets representation for immigration cases, and that's a big deal for asylum seekers. Right now, we don't have that in Kansas City. We have been making tangible steps to kind of keep improving our community coordination. Our community advocacy network is working a lot better together over the past few years. The major barrier always ends up being money. There's not enough money to cover all these legal fees. If that's the barrier. We need help. We need help to be able to cover more people to the network, to get people referred to the right lawyer they need, and to know that they'd be able to not have to worry about the cost so much. They could just get connected to a lawyer who could actually win their case or improve their case. The studies show really clearly, even if you're not going to win full asylum, just by having that legal representation or the access to the right person in the network who can show you what to do, your outcome just really increased by a lot. For some people, this is a matter of life and death. Some people who get deported to El Salvador right now, if the gang member had it out for you from even years ago, they'll remember you. El Salvador is a small country. It's like the size of New Jersey. People will find you. For some people, getting deported is a death sentence. And if you lose your asylum appeal, you get a deportation order, right? This is really serious stuff. It's not a fun and games presentation. Oh, we lost the slide there. Oh, she's posting the link. Okay, good. And Molly's also sharing us the Action Network link that I'll mention here in a second. Oh, no, or is that the donation link? We'll troubleshoot that right now as I continue to make sure you get the right link. If we don't get her on the chat right now, we'll make sure on the email we send out that it has the correct donation link for you all. We encourage you, please donate. This is a really huge thing. Get other people to donate. This would be a tangible step forward to being able to cover more people, for people to have the opportunity. For those who don't know, the Kansas City Immigration Court, we have one of the worst rates for asylum in the whole country because people just can't afford a lawyer, and we have a stacked deck system. It's really hard to work with. So please donate now. Other points you can work on today: action steps. We need you to take action. We have this link prepared for you through the Action Network. And if you use this link, it'll walk you through what to do. And this will get you to a letter point where you can send it to your Congress or congressional representative or to your senator. And we ask you to please, right now, take action on this tonight. If you don't have time tonight, put it on your calendar and get it done this week. Send something to your representative. It does make a difference. Tell them that you are against this administration's abuse of the asylum system. Tell them that you're for human rights for asylum seekers. That's simple. 2 points. You're against abuse of the asylum system. You're for human rights of asylum seekers. And whatever else you want to add to that message is fine. These do make a difference. The more your representatives see these messages coming in, the more they know that their constituents take this issue seriously, and they have to think about that when they vote in their positions as legislators. Also, for those in the local area who know about our recent work for Safe and Welcoming, we have one more plug here. Please help us to keep up the pressure on that. Send a message with that email link there to Mayor Alvey. Let him know that you support Safe and Welcoming. If you don't know about the safe and welcoming issue, that's another presentation. You can ask us about that privately or in the Q&A here. So again, right now, donate, use your voice, take action now, right now. We are, if you go to the next slide, we have a link here for you too. There you go, on feedback. So we know some of the technical difficulties did not go according to plan today, but we have a link here for if you have feedback for us on anything else we can improve if we do these presentations or actions in the future. All feedback is welcome. Just please make it constructive feedback. We always know that we always have to keep improving everything we do. Next step there, or next slide. We know there was a lot of information tonight, and we could see in the comments already that people are getting interested in this history. Some of it, a lot of U.S. citizens have just never heard of before. Some people are asking, how can I help spread this information around more? Here are some resources you can use. Go get these books, start studying, look it up. None of this information is a secret. None of this is really a secret. The only thing is some people seem to care about learning about it, some people don't, but none of it's a secret. If you don't have time to read all these books, look there at the Honduras Now podcast and the Homeland Insecurity podcast. We'll send these slides to you, by the way. Those podcasts have a really incredible information. You'll learn a lot from them, and you can listen to them while you're at work. Follow Cross Border Network on Facebook. Follow Advocates for Immigrant Rights on Facebook so you can keep up with some of these actions and these news items as they're evolving. You can see them faster. Follow the Honduras Solidarity Network on Facebook. They're the group right out of Honduras. You'll see lots of interesting updates about what's going on there. You'll see the info live about protests happening there. You'll learn a lot just by exposure that way. So follow these resources. We'll get you these slides. Donate today, take action, write to your congressional representative tonight. Now with that, we're able to go into Q&A. We have, we can go on Q&A for however long people have questions, I think. If you have a lot of questions, we'll go as long as you want, right? Are you stewarding that Q&A there, Judy?
Yeah, well, we were going to, I think Christine and Molly were going to review questions, but I haven't seen any questions. So, you know, we can let you unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like. Thanks for all the positive comments. It sounds like people are enjoying this. And let me just say that we will be sending you all an email with all of these links and links to the letter you can send to your representative or senator and to donate, and the book list and so on and so forth. We'll send that to you. If you're registered, you'll get it after the meeting. I've got the whole list. And thanks to everybody who participated. Thanks to Claire, thanks to Corliss and Christina, thanks to Dioselin, thanks to Syra, thanks to Trinidad. I think, you know, we haven't worked together. All of us haven't worked together before. This is a joint operation of 3 different organizations, actually 4 different operations. So I'm really pleased. But please ask us your questions if you have questions. Is there guidance available on letter writing content? Yes, Claire has written us a sample letter, and you can simply send that, or you can change it. This is on Action Network, and that gives you the option of adding your own comments or using the letter that we've already drafted. And it will take you to your senator and your representative. Any questions? Yeah, Nora, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
There were 2 points made for the senator's letters. One was the attack on the asylum system, and what was the second one, please? You mentioned two points that we need to make in the letters for the senators.
Yeah, we want them to speak out. They're very quiet. Yeah, it's basically that Trump is attacking the asylum system and making it impossible for people to apply for asylum.
Right, but there was a second point, human rights. It has to do with human rights, Bienvenido. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, okay. So if you want to keep it simple, you could have 2 main points. You could say you are against the administration's abuse of asylum seekers and you are for protecting human rights of asylum seekers. That's one way you could phrase it, or you could change the language a bit.
Yep.
And I just saw in the comments, Susanna posted another like simple sample letter. That's a short version that looks pretty good if you want to use that too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's in the comments if you want to copy it. It says, as a resident of Missouri and one of your constituents, I implore that you consider supporting asylum seekers and keeping the asylum seeking laws in place. Asylum seeking is a staple of this country and is actually that reason this country was established. Listen to the cries of the families. I hope you do the right thing. That's very nice. Thank you. Other questions? You can just raise your hand. Maria.
I have one question. Does any of you have an opinion of a change of regime here, what impact that would have on asylum? Will some of these more onerous things be abandoned or will they continue? Any guess?
Geneva Alberti says yes in the chat. Will they change? Well, we certainly hope so. I think if you listened to the Democratic Convention last week, you didn't hear anything about immigration. And it is clearly not something that the Biden campaign is running on. I think they're afraid of it. But does anyone want to respond? Claire, do you have any insight into?
I would like to be hopeful to think that the Biden campaign is going to take us in a new direction. It's going to take years to unwind the damage that the Trump administration has done. They've attacked the immigration laws with the precision of a surgeon, as well as a bludgeon. It's been incredible to watch, and so people underestimate the real damage that he's been able to do. So it's going to take a long time. Maybe we'll get comprehensive immigration reform out of the deal if we could get Congress to act. I don't know. I would love to see, obviously, the first thing that would happen would be changes at the border to unwind some of the devastating things that I talked about in my presentation, to start allowing people at least to come through again and present and seek asylum at the border. But I want to be hopeful, but I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess, if we do get a new regime, that it will mean a huge change in what we are seeing today.
I'm sharing this one off memory, so I don't remember the exact phrasing. I had a policy expert friend who let me know before that their campaign at least had announced they would undo a lot of the border policies that Trump's been implementing. So it would probably be a lot better. But as we kind of seen, these are long foreign policy trends that kind of exacerbate these problems. They've gone on for a long time. So it's definitely, we always encourage people to vote, but understand this is a longer battle than just November. There's a lot that needs to be done, and we need to really change the cycle of how our country continues with our foreign policy decisions, right?
One thing I would also mention, sorry, I'm an immigration lawyer too, is that, as I think Claire alluded to earlier, the attorneys general under Trump have been incredibly active in the immigration realm. They can make decisions that are binding on immigration judges, in addition to also setting policies for, immigration judges having to finish 700 cases a year and things like that. But they're also making decisions that are affecting huge swaths of immigrants, including, as Claire mentioned, the case where they basically tried to claim that women who are victims of domestic violence are no longer eligible for asylum. They've done, it's been more than 20 different decisions between Jeff Sessions and Barr alone, way more than 20. I haven't done a count in a while, so it's gone up, but decisions that are directly impacting very, very negatively immigrants, whether it's asylum seekers or other immigrants, but especially they've been especially heavy on making decisions that are negatively affecting asylum seekers. So if nothing else, we get a different president. We're not going to have attorneys general who are doing this kind of stuff. And I'm hoping we'll get one that actually will start undoing some of that stuff. So it will make a difference.
Well, and I would simply add that no positive changes that are not changes for the elites ever occur in this country without a movement pushing them. And so we have to keep the pressure on these guys. I don't see that a Biden administration is going to do this without a significant amount of pressure. Mm-hmm. So write these guys, keep writing, go to demonstrations, do whatever you can to support immigrant rights. Otherwise, we're not going to see that much change.
Hopefully you guys will be organizing something along that line, which we'd be happy to participate in, sure, from our area too.
Well, we're going to work on it. Yeah. Somebody asked if we were recording, and yes, we are recording. We actually should have told you that in the first place. And there will be a recording available, and we'll send you a link. It'll be put on the Cross Border Network webpage, so you can listen to it or tell your friends to listen to it. We had hoped to do this on Facebook, but somehow we couldn't make the Facebook link work. I need a master's degree in Zoom. Other questions?
I've got a question, or just an observation. I may have missed the part where you were talking about or defining neoliberalism, and I think what I'm hearing from it is it meaning a kind of unbridled free marketeering. Is that right? Is that basically?
Well, basically, neoliberalism is based on the economic theories that an unregulated market, a free market, will lead to the best possible outcomes for everybody. And so you need to get the government out of everything. You know, I guess Reagan started it when he said that, you know, government was the biggest problem. And so, you know, shrink government. Sorry, my dog is going crazy. Claire has kids, I have a dog. Anyway, so privatize, deregulate, and allow the wealthy to the wealth of the wealthy to grow. I mean, we've seen great income inequality, but we've also seen terrific corruption everywhere that neoliberal policies have been put into effect.
I'm just thinking as I hear this, the problem with the word itself, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, is that it's you know, it's conflating liberalism, which many consider to be a good thing, with neo, which is new, and all of a sudden you're kind of lost in a morass. And I was just looking up in Wikipedia as we were talking. There's a lot of definitions for this in Wikipedia. There may be, and a little bit nuancing and so forth. My point being that it may be, unless you're in a real kind of in-group where everybody has a common understanding of what that means, to use a term that's that is less freighted, I guess you could say.
This is a term that's used all over the world. And you know, when we talk about liberalism in the United States, nobody else uses it that way. So we're sort of the odd country out in terms of the way we talk about liberalism. This is a reference to classical liberalism, a la Adam Smith, where, you know, you allowed the free market to rule. And so it's returned to free market economics, laissez-faire capitalism.
Just a thought.
Yes.
Yeah, it is confusing, I agree. And maybe libertarianism would be sometimes a word we could interchange too. But it's, and Milton Friedman and the complete free market, unregulated theories is what we're talking about.
Or maybe just bad capitalism.
Well, that's assuming there's good capitalism.
Yeah. Unregulated capitalism, perhaps.
Yeah, that's more descriptive.
Yeah, but many theorists these days basically see the stage of capitalism that we are in as as an inevitable outcome. I mean, it's not just the U.S. that's turned towards libertarian economics. It's most of the world, and it grew out of a profit crisis. So, you know, to say, oh, we can just go back to like the Roosevelt era capitalism. Many economists are saying to us today that we can't go back there. That the system simply doesn't produce the kind of productivity and profits that can be distributed this way. And so it's much more complicated than that.
Are there any more questions from people about some of the content of the history of Central America that we went over too?
No, I would like to just have more. There are so many. I mean, there was a really super good overview, and I would really be interested in more detail. I knew that our government was involved in a lot of these revolutions and overthrow of some of these governments, but I didn't know the details, and it doesn't make the mainstream news. And if it does, it's, you know, a sentence and on with the next thing. So, you know, having more information about this and also helping to educate more people about this.
It's hard. It's hard because when I was a student several years ago, I studied in El Salvador for a time, and I learned a lot of things about the United States, my country, that I did not like to hear, but it was true, unfortunately, and how much we'd affect El Salvador, another country that I came to love. And I always had to ask, why does it have to be this way? And unfortunately, even the more I learn about all this, how this history, I could tell my own friend networks all day, and it really makes people uncomfortable. They don't really often want to hear it. And it's a hard thing, the conversation to have, but we have to have those conversations.
Well, we kind of opened we opened a box by talking about slavery and injustice and Black Lives Matter. You know, maybe it's a good time to open this box too.
That's what I was trying to do when I made my statement.
Yes.
A book I would like to actually suggest, the one that I read not about a year or two ago, but still relevant now. It's called Empire's Workshop, and it's by Greg Grandin. I thought it was an excellent book to read. I don't think I saw it there on the list. I can put it in the chat. It's
I have another book by him on the list.
Oh, you do? A different book? Okay.
Yeah, he has a newer book.
I'll put it there in the chat. It's a great one. And then there was the what's the one by the Uruguayan author that was on there? Open Base of Latin America.
Eduardo Galeano.
Yeah. That was a wonderful book to read. So if you're interested in learning more, those two books I would suggest. I'll put the Greg Grandin book in the comments. And it's at our local libraries here, so feel free to support them and check it out.
And one book, I'll just hold this up, that I don't think we talked about at Cross Border very much, but it's called Overthrow by Stephen Kinser. I don't know if you can see this. And it's just a collection of about 13 different regime changes that the U.S. was complicit in or the creator of. And yeah, it's pretty enlightening too, historically.
And I can't lose a chance to mention on Judy's website for Cross Border Network, they have a huge comprehensive Honduras report, which you should go look at to learn more. It's really impressive.
Right. Oh, yeah, we forgot to mention it, that if you donate to the fund, we'll send you a real copy of this report, which is called When Fleeing is Your Only Option. It's a report from the delegation that Corliss and Christina talked about. And so make a donation, we'll send you a report. What happened was we printed a whole bunch of these things in March, and they're still sitting in a box because we couldn't have in-person events and hand them out. But we'd love to get them to you.
It's a very nice little booklet with lots of information.
So make a donation. Any other questions?
And really wonderful pictures to tell the story along with the process.
No, make a donation to the new fund, the Bienvenido Fund, and we'll send you a copy. I mean, sure, you can donate to the Cross Border Network, but right now we're focusing on donations to this fund to help immigrants with their fees. And that was Melissa who just talked, and she went on the delegation too. She's one of our board members. And we had a comment in the chat. Well, actually, we have a couple. Let's see here. When will the recording of this be available, hopefully by tomorrow morning. And I'll try to get it up tonight. And Michael had said the Washington consensus and structural adjustment policies, libertarianism theoretically, does not promote as much militarism. How do we more effectively talk about our imperial overreach for regime change? Read Killing Hope by William Blum. Militarism seems to be an increasingly strong part of US policy, at least since the end of the Cold War. But understand that we have maintained a massive military since World War II. You know, with overkill that would blow up the world multiple times. But since the end of the Cold War, what we've seen is wars all over the place, many of which the US is either involved in or arming, as in the war in Yemen. But Latin America has been a particular victim of US militarism going back to the era of gunboat diplomacy, you know, 100 years ago, where whenever some Latin American leader got out of line, refused to pay debts, refused to, one of the things we did is when countries got into debt, we would take over their customs operations and we would collect the duties on all of their imports and use that to pay off the debts. We'd send in the Marines in order to do that. That was typical US policy in many places. And so, you know, what the Monroe Doctrine, which was a policy that said, we don't want you Europeans coming into the newly liberated Latin American countries, was turned on its head and basically said, we don't want you newly liberated Latin American countries doing anything that's against our interests. And that gave us the excuse. Most recently, the war on drugs gave us the excuse to send massive amounts of military aid and intelligence into Central America. A couple of us from Cross Border Network in 2012 went to the Mosquitia, which is the rainforest area of far eastern Honduras, to investigate the killing of 4 indigenous people and the injuring of 4 others who were on a boat traveling up a river and were fired upon from 4 State Department helicopters that were filled with both US soldiers recently come back from a drug interdiction in Afghanistan and Honduran police. And they mistook this boat, passenger boat, for drug runners. And they opened fire on these innocent civilians. We have never compensated those people for that. It's a real scandal, but random killings because of the war on drugs and the excuse of militarizing Honduras has really had a major impact on that country and on driving people out once again.
I wanted to make a quick note. Claire and Molly had reposted the donation link that actually works, not the one that didn't work. So if anyone was having trouble with that, it's reposted, and we'll make sure on that follow-up email there's another link with the right link. So if you have any other questions here about the things you have to follow up with us, we can put some of our organization contact info in the chat for you if you need to contact us to follow up.
And you can put questions as well if you think, or suggestions and feedback in the feedback form, which I posted in chat as well.
Okay, yeah, there's lots of stuff in chat. We'll send you the chat too, because it's Zoom very nicely saves chat. I think we're about done, unless there are any other questions or comments. We've gone 2 hours. Thank you all so much.
Had a great audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye-bye.
Sure, vote and put pressure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to all the people from Colorado who signed up. That was